Uh, Stacey Alghawas, welcome to my show.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Sadak.
Can you pronounce the name of the show?
Kanafa?
Kanafa is something you eat.
Kanafa?
Yes, it's al-Kanafa.
Kanafa.
And I would love to know if you know what al-Kanafa means.
I think it means the old name for the couches that they used to have in the diwaniyas.
There you go.
Out
There you
in
go.
the Minzaman, the old
Yes.
Kuwaiti style where
Yes.
people used to sit in the neighborhood and chat.
Yep, exactly. And that's what this show is all about. Al-Kanafa show is all about me, you, and everybody else. We just sit down and talk, our hearts out. Where there's no laws, regulations that govern this conversation.
Okay.
We just talk. Cut me off, I'll cut you off. We just talk like everybody else.
Sounds good.
The way they used to do it. And the reason I have you here, Stacey, today is because you have a very interesting life. I met you a few years ago in a couple of the trainings that we used to work on, me and you. And I always admired your personality,
Oh, thank you.
your heart, your appearance as well.
Thank you.
You look like a model, if not. So I really would love to welcome you over.
Thank you. It's really
I'm
lovely
really
to
happy
be here.
to have you in my studio. So Stacey Alghawas. Stacey is a completely 100% authentic American name. Alghawas, last name, is a completely authentic, traditional Kuwaiti name or Arabic name. Alghawas means
The diver.
the diver. He used to go and get the lulu.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
The hard job.
all right, let's start from there. How did that happen? How did Stacey become Alghawas? And when did that happen?
So I was Stacey Carpenter. That was my maiden name. And I met my husband in UC Santa Barbara when we were freshmen. We had Chem 1B together. I'm a biologist. He's a chemical engineer. And we met in chemistry. He was actually my chemistry lab partner.
That was in California.
That was in California. Yeah,
19
Santa Barbara. I met him in 1977.
Okay,
Something
that's
around
way
there.
back.
Yeah,
That's
way back. Yes. And, we just hit it off. It was really interesting because he's so different. And of course, in UC Santa Barbara in those days, everybody that I grew up with from Manhattan Beach, all the surfer people went to Santa Barbara so they could continue to surf. And my husband came along and he was just so unique and so different. And, it was just one of those situations where we were in chemistry lab and we just kind of just started dating. And before we knew it, we graduated and it was time for him to go back to Kuwait. So it was like, well, what are we going to do? So we thought, well, we'll get married. And if it doesn't work,
I'm sure
you just
have
come back to
get
Santa
married.
Barbara. And I was like, okay.
I'm sure you have to get married because now it's maybe a little bit more open society where somebody can have a girlfriend or like a partner. But
Yeah.
back then I was like literally a bit more strict than now.
Well, also just getting to Kuwait, you had to, people didn't come here for tourism.
No,
And
not,
so-
not in the 70s.
No.
Not in
And
the
so
70s.
we had to go and get the, Islamic marriage and
Yes.
the Justice of the Peace marriage and then
So
apply
you
for
did
visa.
that back in California, or you did that here
Yes,
in Kuwait?
we did. Well, we've been married 3 times. Once legally in California. The second time
City
it was
Hall?
an Islamic marriage in Los Angeles. And the third time was here at the Justice Palace.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you got married. You decided.
We got
actually,
married.
you didn't decide. I don't think you decided to move to Kuwait. He was supposed to go back to Kuwait
Yes.
because he was on a scholarship.
That's right.
So he had to go back to Kuwait,
Right.
and you had a choice to go back. And I'm talking back in the 1980, I think.
1980, we got married in July.
Yeah, so 1980, California was coming up really good. I was told.
California is always great.
Yeah, I know.
You never
But
wanna leave.
But like in the 80s, were like pop music, all of that
Yeah.
stuff, and it's just crazy.
Yeah, the
California is a
80s
different
was-
country in a country. So you had to move back.
I did. I just wanted to be with him. We just wanted to be together.
So before you come here, I'm sure you had this perception, imagination,
I'll be honest with
stories?
you. My husband was so integrated into the lifestyle of California, and he was just so himself, so authentic. And the things that I really loved about him were, he would serve tea, and he was always so polite, and he was always neat and organized. And then I thought, wow, this is really great. And then when we moved back to Kuwait, I realized, well, everyone's that way. That's not so unique.
Thank you very much.
Right. And that the whole culture is neat
very,
and has etiquette, and
especially
people are polite.
back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. And so when I got married and then I moved to Kuwait, it was interesting because that's when you see the difference in the personality versus the culture. And until I did that, I didn't really understand.
Yeah, but take me a little bit prior to that, like when you wanted to come down. What was in your head? What was everybody saying? Because I know stories about camels, and I know stories about you live in the desert, tents and whatnot. So was that in your head before?
No, actually, it wasn't. I didn't have any preconceived ideas that my husband was a Bedouin or that he.
No, I'm not talking about him in particular. I'm talking about Kuwait in general.
The culture. So I had, I read a lot about ancient civilizations. So I knew about ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt and those things. So my dad has a pretty extensive library. So when I met my husband, I was very curious. This is before we were dating, and so I went home on a weekend and I picked up my Encyclopedia Britannica from my dad's library and read about Kuwait, and I read about Arabic.
So
and
what did you read about Kuwait?
Just how it's hot and how it's on the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, and its geographical location, next to Saudi.
Yeah, but before you come down here, what did you know about this country?
Well, what I knew was just basically what I'd seen on television. I had seen a program where they talked about the Gulf states, and they showed a picture of Kuwaitis riding Mercedes on sand dunes, and
so no camels.
And the oil wealth.
So no camels.
So when my husband said, "Oh, I have a camel and I live in a tent," I go, "No, you don't." And he was kind of surprised that I knew that story didn't go over very well.
It didn't work.
I'm like, "No, you don't."
Because that's
an
old
I don't
trick
think
everybody
so.
use. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could imagine.
But, there were a lot of things about politics that I didn't understand, that I'd never even heard of. Things about Palestine and Israel and this whole...
It was all new to you.
Yeah.
Because you were just a kid. You were just barely 22, I think.
Yeah, when I got married.
Yeah.
But when I first met him and he had all these political discussions, I was kind of like, what? Where's all that coming from?
But you have to understand, he lives in the blender.
Yeah.
He lives where all of that is happening. So it's in everyday news.
And Americans,
but in California, back then, you were all worried about what kind of music is released today, new shoe, whatever, style, life.
It's just completely
college.
different.
Yeah. All right. So now you moved to Kuwait, and I think you moved to Kuwait in 1980.
1980. Moved to Kuwait, lived with a family, which was a complete shock to my system because everything is different.
Of course.
We don't have doors with handles and skeleton keys, air conditioning, ceiling fans in those days. Everyone had a ceiling fan.
Yes, remember those days.
Oh, remember those days.
Uh-huh.
The family sat on the floor and ate ate with their hands. And my mother-in-law would make these giant, huge mounds of food. And my husband has, 6 brothers, and we'd all sit around with his mom and dad. And
how did that feel?
Because in the beginning, it was very awkward.
I lived in California. I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And I totally understand. So I'm trying to put myself in your shoe. So I move on to a place where everybody's together and just eat together.
Yeah.
The whole family's like I tried to explain to my mom one time what is a family reunion, because at that time I was supposed to come back to Kuwait in my break, and I was like, "No, Mom, I'm just going with a friend of mine to we were going to North Carolina, from LA to North Carolina for his family reunion. He invited me over, so I wanted to go. So I was like, "Mom, I'm not coming back because I'm going with my friend to his family reunion." And Mom was like, "What is it, family reunion?" I was like, "We're family get together." I was like, "Don't they do that every day?" I was like, "Not in California."
Not when they're thousands of miles apart.
That's where we come from, but not in California. So I totally understand that from your part of of the country?
It's
or,
so
but how did it feel though? Did it feel better or did it feel?
I enjoyed it. I always felt welcomed. I always felt that I belonged. They went out of their way to make me feel comfortable.
All right.
And when I got married, my husband was the first son to get married. And so a lot of his brothers were a lot younger. And I had known some of them because they used to come and stay with us in Santa Barbara. They would come visit. They were at our wedding. And so I always had a very good rapport with them. The problem was the language. I did not speak a word of Arabic.
Did they speak English?
I had to varying degrees, but no, because in those days you didn't learn Arabic until I think you were in 4th grade. Mm-hmm. So, it was pretty rudimentary. It was interesting. I think you learned
Was
to
it
read.
pretty hard to communicate at the beginning?
Well, I think you learn to read body language.
Oh, okay.
And I think you pick up on some.
So when you get hungry, you be like,
yeah. I think you learn some key words right away.
Okay.
And my sister-in-law was visiting, and she had a 2 and a 4-year-old, and I had a sewing room. So my husband set up a room for me to sew. I brought my sewing machine with me, and some fabric. So I used to sit and sew out in the Mohawk, Okay. And the kids would come out and play with the pins and needles, and I'd give them things to do. And I learned all kinds of words like wawa for when you get hurt and sarsur for cockroach. I was learning like child Arabic. Okay. And then I'm cooking Arabic because I was with my mother-in-law in the kitchen.
Did you learn Arabic?
I did. And I went to the university and I studied classical Arabic,
يعني الحين أنت stacey تفهمين أنا شنو قاعد أقول؟
So the problem is my first
Hold on a
year
minute now.
I had immersion.
But hold on a minute now. تفهمين شنو قاعد أقول؟
Yes, but I'm trying to say that the problem I have is that I learned Arabic by immersion with limited vocabulary from whatever people were speaking in the home. Uh-huh. And then we left and went and did our masters and our PhDs. So I came back, I did not live with the family. So that first year of immersion, my Arabic was actually, because no one spoke English, I had to speak Arabic.
Okay.
Of course, my conversations were limited to, just basic communication. But then we left, and when we came back, we didn't live with the family. And then at that point, unfortunately, I think I look back and my big regret is not being able to speak Arabic the way, I should have. Just not being exposed to it, because every time I took a job, they needed my English. They wanted me to write in English. They wanted me to speak in English. They wanted me to correct their English.
Especially back in the days.
And meanwhile, the younger generation is learning English in school.
Yes.
And so now, which I think is wonderful, you find that most young Kuwaitis are bilingual, which is wonderful. But then I'm not bilingual because I was teaching everyone English. So hello, shinu hada, it's not fair.
Yeah, I totally agree. So but you do understand Arabic?
It depends on the situation. It depends on the conversation. If I'm sitting in a business meeting, I can pick up on the Arabic, because if I'm involved in that project, I will understand the vocabulary and I'll understand.
But I mean, just regular stuff like شلونك stacey, شخبارك.
Yeah.
You get that, right?
Yeah.
وين رايحة?
Yeah, exactly.
كم الساعة?
Yes.
The regular stuff, so you can communicate. And I'm pretty sure from knowing your daughter as well, you guys speak English most of the time.
So we speak English at home. They call it the mother tongue because you speak what your mother speaks.
Yeah.
And my children have had to learn Arabic I put them in, like a bilingual school, Bayan, and Arabic tutors at the house all the time. And then once they start knowing enough to be able to converse, then my husband jumps in and starts speaking. Okay. And their cousins are all fluent in Arabic, obviously. The problem is that they all go to English schools and American schools. Uh-huh. So when we're together in the house, everyone's speaking English.
So how was it when you just got here and you started to get situated, especially when you moved on your own with your husband in your own place? So you had to move around, drive around, get a job. How was it?
It was a little bit nerve-wracking, to be honest with you, because when I first got here, my husband got a job. He went to Kisser, and I would stay home. And then I got a job at the Faculty of Medicine, and I would drive all the way from Rumathia to Shueikh in those days. And the driving was crazy because you had 3 lanes with 5 cars, and the minute the light turned green, everybody would honk, and it was a little bit chaotic.
Yeah.
But you know what? You pick up on it, and now I love driving in Kuwait. When I go back to California, and everyone is like slow and in their lane, and they hesitate to get on the freeway, and I'm just like, man, I really miss driving in Kuwait.
Listen, I think I'm a slow driver, and my cousin came back from California last night, so I picked her up. And when I was driving, she's freaking out all the time. And I was like, listen, I'm a very conservative driver.
Okay.
You should see others and how they drive in Kuwait. I'm nothing. So anyways, so you come back to Kuwait. And 1979 is the war between Iraq and Iraq.
Exactly, Iran-Iraq war.
I think that's another big incidence for you as a young American girl in the Middle East in Kuwait, in a very warm zone. Because the war was right around the corner.
The war was around the corner.
Was you afraid?
No, not really. I think what I noticed, though, when I think back on those years, was when I first came to Kuwait, it was very liberal. And the women were very chic, and everyone had, like, mini skirts and their hair. We'd go to these parties, and everybody was, like, dressed to kill. And, Kuwaiti women are very glamorous. Mm-hmm. And then I noticed that when I would come back after that, like just to visit, I noticed that more and more people were putting on the hijab, a lot of the younger women, and pressuring their older sisters and mothers to become covered and become more religious.
With my family as well.
Yeah, and so I really noticed a turning point, and that people started to become, on the exterior, much more conservative.
True.
And I remember having a debate with one of my husband's friends, and he said, I think all women should wear the hijab. And I said, but according to Islam, that is a personal decision. True. And that you shouldn't do it without conviction. Mm-hmm. And that to do it just artificially and superficially is really not what the religion is teaching you. And we had a huge argument about it, and I thought he's being a hypocrite because you can't force people into believing.
True, I totally agree. We all live in that life where people have sometimes double standards without knowing that. Mm-hmm. I've learned something from the U.S. military when I joined in 2003. We were down in Iraq, and I was sitting down talking with the Marine. I hate to call them the corps, but like with the Marines. So I was like talking about morality and stuff and religion. Me coming from the from Islamic background and this and that. Mm-hmm. So we're discussing all of that. He was like, "Listen, let me tell you something. Hypocrites will always be there, whether it's Muslims, Christians, whatever." Oh
yeah, it's a human nature.
And we have a big saying in here. He was very much older than me, and he was like, "Listen, kid, you put this in your ears wherever you go. Everybody wants to go to heaven. Nobody wants to die."
Mm-hmm. True.
And you can't go to heaven if you don't die. You have to die to go to heaven. So that's something I heard one time, and it always stuck with me. So you have to back up what you say, if you got a big mouth, you better have big arms.
Well, and I think I
want to see your actions.
You have to have integrity, and you have to believe in something and believe it for yourself.
True.
And be true to that, and not try to always be pleasing other people and say, "Oh, I'm going to dress this way and act this way to please other people," but inside that's not who I am.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I can't agree more because I have met many people in Kuwait. We're talking about this afternoon. There's so many girls that wears the hijab in their houses, and once they travel, they just take it off.
Or they wear it to please their fathers or their brothers, or
the neighbors,
they think that they're going to get married easier. People are going to see them in a certain way.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I don't blame them, to be honest, to do that because they have to do certain things because of society, because of culture, because of this and that. But anyways, so you come down here, it's the war, and life goes on. And
life goes on.
You work. Things are going great. Stacey Alghawas is becoming a little bit more Kuwaiti. Fast forward, we meet. And later on, I was like, Can you raise it? I want people to see it. Yeah. And later on, I was like, Kuwaitia, Amerikia. Can you put focus on, please? Hold on, let me pull the focus.
Whoops, sorry.
Kuwaitia, Amerikia.
Yes.
So
California
Stacey,
girl in Kuwait.
Yeah, California girl in Kuwait. All right. So now you are writing a book about this Californian girl in Kuwait,
Yes.
Middle East. So freaking hot in here. Have you sitting down on the Qanafa today discussing all of that? When I was reading the book, I was looking at a few things because I really knew that at some point in life I'm going to meet you and discuss it. When was the first time you had henna?
Oh, right after I got to Kuwait.
Really?
Yes.
So it was like one of the rituals that they accepted you, and it was like, all right, you're one of us now.
It was an initiation. It was like a hazing.
Okay.
My mother-in-law, of course, in the beginning I didn't speak any Arabic and she
Yeah.
didn't speak any English. My father-in-law spoke a little French and I spoke a little French, and so we kind of got along. So, my husband would leave during the day and I'd be there with the ladies, my mother-in-law and her maid, and we would be cooking and I would be doing things, I'd be sewing, and one day she's stirring, I'm out, my sewing room is next to hers in the Mohawk with the kitchen.
Yeah.
And she's stirring
Mohawk.
this, yes, and she's
Okay.
stirring this giant pot, and I thought it was food, and I came in and I'm like, oh, what is that? And she's like, oh, it's for your hair. And I knew the word for hair. It's good. And I thought, oh, okay. And I know she puts this on all the time, and she had this really auburn hair. I didn't
Yes.
realize that wasn't her hair color, okay? And so they talked me into
It's more
doing
like a
it.
redhead,
She put red berries and
Yes.
coffee and made this, it was like this bubbling green oozy, and it had this hay. It
and it
smelled
has
like
this smell.
I like the smell. Some people
I
don't.
don't like it.
Some people don't. I
I
thought
stay
it
away from
smelled
it.
like grass or hay, and
Yeah, well, I remember every time I come back from school and my moms and
Yeah.
sisters had this, I just run away.
yeah. Well, it's kind of ugly, but. And so they were sitting there doing it, and then she's like, "Oh, you want to do it? On your hair? Yeah." And I was like, "Okay, why not?" I didn't realize it was permanent, obviously.
Okay.
And yes, you cannot get it out. You can't even dye over
Does
it.
it fade?
Nope. You have to just grow it out.
I had no idea.
Yep. And so they put it on my hair and they wound it up in these rags like a giant turban, and it's
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah.
And it's like my head was it was heavy, and it was like dripping.
Yeah.
And and then they put it in the hands. You put it in your hand, and then you wrap your hands up, right?
That's
so your
old
fingernails.
school. That's old school,
Hey
yeah.
man, we're talking old school. And so
That's old school. Now
Then we
they have
took it off
different
the
ways of
hands,
doing
and
it.
I thought, oh my God, look at this stuff. It won't come off.
Yeah.
And then I had this realization that it might be in my hair too, but I didn't panic because I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
My husband came home, saw me with this thing. No big deal. No big deal. Oh yeah, my mom does that.
Okay.
I think he was as clueless as I was,
Yeah.
which is part of the problem.
Right.
We were both pretty clueless. And then we went down to the ocean to wash it out. So we went down to the sea.
Bahari.
Yeah, and washed our hair in the salt water, and shampooed it, which made me really upset that we were putting soap in the ocean. But hey, whatever, everyone's
Okay.
doing it, right?
Yeah.
Came home, looked at my hair,
Did
and
you
went,
like it?
"No, it was like bozo red." It was like you put henna on blonde hair, and it's
I
really
had no
super
idea.
orange and red.
Yeah, I know.
And I washed it and washed it and washed it until I think I rubbed my scalp raw, and I realized it was there to stay.
It wasn't the thing to do.
No, but
anyways,
I'll tell you what, I continued doing it for 13 years.
Really?
And everyone thought I was a redhead. And I was in the
Oh.
States doing my master's with red hair. And my advisor used to always make these red hair comments like, "Oh, you're such a redhead." And I'm like, "Pfft."
I haven't seen any pictures of that.
Oh,
I
you
need to see
haven't?
pictures. No.
I had-
I always knew you, Stacey, as the blonde.
Yeah, lately, yeah. Well, you know what happened is you start getting gray, and then your gray hairs. So when you continuously put henna on, it gets darker and darker.
Yes.
It turns a really beautiful auburn color.
Okay.
Just layers and layers, and then the gray hair starts coming out orange.
Okay.
And then I got really tired of having to sit around for hours with this mud on my head because it's dirty and uncomfortable. So I went to a salon and I said, "Can you do something with this?" And she goes, "No, I can't do anything with henna." And this was a girl from Iceland. And so I said, "Well, can we grow out my roots, and when it gets just, and then I'll cut it, and then we go back to a normal color." And because of that experience, I actually ended up opening my own salon.
Okay.
So
well,
I turned it into a business opportunity.
okay, that's really good to know. I think we've talked a lot. Let's have a break, drink
Okay.
some coffee, water, and we'll come back for
Okay.
more stories from Stacey Alghawas.
Thank you.